Chapter 26, Part 1 of Ramona. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John L. Ramona by Helen Hunt Jackson. Chapter 26, Part 1. The Capitan's house faced the east. Just as day broke and the light streamed in at the open door, Ramona's eyes unclosed. Felipe and Aunt Ree were both by her side. With a look of bewildered terror, she gazed at them. There, now, you're just shet your eyes and go right off ter sleep again, honey," said Aunt Ree composedly, laying her hand on Ramona's eyelids and compelling them down. "We air higher, Felipe and me, and we air goin' ter stay. I allow yer needn't be afeard o' nothin'. Go ter sleep, honey." The eyelids quivered beneath Aunt Ree's fingers. Tears forced their way and rolled slowly down the cheeks. The lips trembled. The voice strove to speak, but it was only like the ghost of a whisper, the faint question that came. "Felipe?" "Yes, dear, I am here too," breathed Felipe. "Go to sleep. We will not leave you." And again Ramona sank away into the merciful sleep which was saving her life. "The longer she can sleep, the better," said Aunt Ree with a sigh, deep drawn like a groan. "I allow I dread ter see her really come to. It'll be wuss'n the fust. She'll hev ter live it all over again." But Aunt Ree did not know what forces of fortitude had been gathering in Ramona's soul during these last bitter years. Out of her gentle constancy had been woven the heroic fiber of which martyrs are made. This and her inextinguishable faith had made her strong, as were those of old who had trial of cruel mocking, wandering about, being destitute, afflicted, tormented. They wandered in deserts and in mountains, and in dens and caves of the earth. When she waked the second time, it was with a calm, almost beatific smile that she gazed on Felipe and whispered, "How did you find me, dear Felipe?" It was rather by the motions of her lips than by any sound that he knew the words. She had not yet strength enough to make an audible sound. When they laid her baby on her breast, she smiled again and tried to embrace her, but was too weak. Pointing to the baby's eyes, she whispered, gazing earnestly at Felipe, "Alessandro." A convulsion passed over her face as she spoke the word, and the tears flowed. Felipe could not speak. He glanced helplessly at Aunt Ree, who promptly responded, "Now, honey, don't you talk. 'Tain't good for ye, and Felipe and me, we air in a powerful hurry ter get yer strong and well, and tote ye outer this." Aunt Ree stopped. No substantive in her vocabulary answered her need at that moment. "I allow ye can go in a week if nothin' don't go agin ye more'n I see now, but if you git to talkin', there's no tellin' when you'll git up. You jest shet up, honey. We'll look atter everything." Feebly Ramona turned her grateful, inquiring eyes on Felipe. Her lips framed the words, "With you?" "Yes, dear, home with me," said Felipe, clasping her hand in his. "I have been searching for you all this time." An anxious look came into the sweet face. Felipe knew what it meant. How often he had seen it in the olden time. He feared to shock her by the sudden mention of the señora's death, yet that would harm her less than continued anxiety. "I am alone, dear Ramona," he whispered. "There is no one now but you, my sister, to take care of me. My mother has been dead a year." The eyes dilated, then filled with sympathetic tears. "Dear Felipe," she sighed, but her heart took courage. Felipe's phrase was like one inspired. Another duty, another work, another loyalty waiting for Ramona. Not only her child to live for, but to take care of Felipe. Ramona would not die. Youth, a mother's love, a sister's affection and duty on the side of life. The battle was won, and won quickly, too. To the simple Kawiyas it seemed like a miracle, and they looked on Aunt Ree's weather-beaten face with something akin to a superstitious reverence. They themselves were not ignorant of the value of the herb by means of which she had wrought the marvelous cure, but they had made repeated experiments with it upon Ramona without success. It must be that there had been some potent spell in Aunt Ree's handling. They would hardly believe her when, in answer to their persistent questioning, she reiterated the assertion that she had used nothing except the hot water and old man, which was her name for the wild wormwood, and which, when explained to them, impressed them greatly, as having no doubt some significance in connection with the results of her preparation of the leaves. Rumors about Felipe ran swiftly through the region. The presence in the Kawiya village of a rich Mexican gentleman who spent gold like water and kept mounted men riding day and night after everything, anything, he wanted for his sick sister, was an event which, in the atmosphere of that lonely country, loomed into colossal proportions. He had traveled all over California with 4 horses in search of her. He was only waiting till she was well to take her to his home in the South, and then he was going to arrest the man who had murdered her husband and have him hanged. Yes, hanged. Small doubt about that. Or, if the law cleared him, there was still the bullet. This rich señor would see him shot, if rope were not to be had. Jim Farrar heard these tales, and quaked in his guilty soul. The rope he had small fear of, for well he knew the temper of San Diego County juries and judges. But the bullet, that was another thing, and these Mexicans were like Indians in their vengeance. Time did not tire them, and their memories were long. Farrar cursed the day he had let his temper get the better of him on that lonely mountainside. How much the better, nobody but he himself knew. Nobody but he and Ramona, and even Ramona did not know the bitter whole. She knew that Alessandro had no knife and had gone forward with no hostile intent, but she knew nothing beyond that. Only the murderer himself knew that the dialogue which he had reported to the judge and jury to justify his act was an entire fabrication of his own, and that, instead of it, had been spoken but 4 words by Alessandro, and those were, "Señor, I will explain," and that even after the first shot had pierced his lungs and the blood was choking in his throat, he had still run a step or 2 farther, with his hand uplifted deprecatingly, and made one more effort to speak before he fell to the ground, dead. Callous as Farrar was, and clear as it was in his mind that killing an Indian was no harm, he had not liked to recall the pleading anguish in Alessandro's tone and in his face as he fell. He had not liked to recall this, even before he heard of this rich Mexican brother-in-law who had appeared on the scene, and now he found the memories still more unpleasant. Fear is a wonderful goad to remorse. There was another thing, too, which, to his great wonder, had been apparently overlooked by everybody. At least, nothing had been said about it. But the bearing of it on his case, if the case were brought up a second time and minutely investigated, would be most unfortunate. And this was, that the only clue he had to the fact of Alessandro's having taken his horse was that the poor, half-crazed fellow had left his own well-known gray pony in the corral in place of the horse he took. A strange thing, surely, for a horse-thief to do. Cold sweat burst out on Farrar's forehead more than once as he realized how this, coupled with the well-known fact of Alessandro's liability to attacks of insanity, might be made to tell against him if he should be brought to trial for the murder. He was as cowardly as he was cruel. Never yet were the 2 traits separate in human nature, and after a few days of this torturing suspense and apprehension, he suddenly resolved to leave the country, if not forever, at least for a few years, till this brother-in-law should be out of the way. He lost no time in carrying out his resolution, and it was well he did not, for it was only 3 days after he had disappeared that Felipe walked into Judge Wells's office one morning to make inquiries relative to the preliminary hearing which had been held there in the matter of the murder of the Indian, Alessandro Assis, by James Farrar. And when the judge, taking down his books, read to Felipe his notes of the case, and went on to say, "If Farrar's testimony is true, Ramona's, the wife's, must be false, and, at any rate, her testimony would not be worth a straw with any jury." Felipe sprang to his feet and cried, "She of whom you speak is my foster sister, and, Señor, if I can find that man, I will shoot him as I would a dog. And I'll see then if a San Diego County jury will hang me for ridding the country of such a brute." And Felipe would have been as good as his word. It was a wise thing Farrar had done in making his escape. When Aunt Ree heard that Farrar had left the country, she pushed up her spectacles and looked reflectively at her informant. It was young Merrill. "Fled their country, has he?" she said. "Well, he can flee as many countries as he likes, and 'twon't do him no good. I know you folks higher don't seem to think killing an Injun's any murder, but I say 'tis, and you'll all get it brung home to you afore you die. If 'tain't brung one way, it'll be another. You just mind what I say, and don't you forget it. Now, this miserable murderer, this Farrar, that's lighted out a higher, he's nothing more'n a skunk, but he's got the law arter him now. It's jest as well he's gone. I never did believe in hangin', I never could. It's jest 2 men dead 'stead of 1. I don't want to see no man hung, no marter what he's done, and I don't want to see no man shot down, nother, no marter what he's done. And this higher Felipe, he's that high strung he'd have shot that Farrar any minute quicker'n lightnin', if he'd ketched him. So it's better all round he's lit out. But I tell you now, he hain't made much by goin'. That Injun he murdered'll follow him night and day till he dies, and long arter. He'll wish he was dead afore he doos die. I allow he will now. He'll be jest like a man I knowed back in Tennessee. I wa'n't but a mite then, but I never forgot it. 'Tis a great country for gourds, East Tennessee is, where I was raised. And thar was 2 houses and a fence between 'em, and these gourds a-runnin' all over the fence. And one of the children picked one of them gourds, and they fit about it. And then the women took it up, the children's mothers, yer know, and they got fightin' about it. And then, to the last, the men took it up, and they fit, and Rowell, he got his butcher knife, and he ground it up, and he picked a quarrel with Claiborne, and it cut him inter pieces. They had him up for't, and somehow they clared him. I don't see how they ever did, but they put off, and at last they got him free, and he lived on thar a spell. But he couldn't stand it, 'peared like he never had no peace, and he come over to our house, and said he, 'Jake,' they allers called Daddy Jake, or Uncle Jake, 'Jake,' said he, 'I can't stand it livin' higher.' 'Why,' says Daddy, 'the law of the country's clared ye.' 'Yes,' says he, 'but the law of God hain't. And I've got Claiborne allers with me. There ain't any path so narrer but he's a-walkin' in it by my side all day, and come night I sleep with him ter one side and my wife t'other, and I can't stan' it.' Them's the very words I heerd him say, and I wasn't anything but a mite, but I didn't forget it. Wal, sir, he went west, way out higher to Californy, and he couldn't stay thar nother, and he come back hum again. And I was bigger then, a gal grown, and Daddy says to him, I hearn him, 'Wal,' says he, 'did Claiborne foller yer?' 'Yes,' says he follered me. I'll never get shed of him in this world. He's allers close to me everywhere.' Yer see, 'twas jest his conscience whippin' him. That's all 'twas. At least that's all I think 'twas, though thar was those that said 'twas Claiborne's ghost. And that'll be the way it'll be with this miserable Farrar. He'll live ter wish he'd let hisself be hanged or shot, or ary which way ter get outer his misery." Young Merrill listened with unwonted gravity to Aunt Ree's earnest words. They reached a depth in his nature which had been long untouched, a stratum, so to speak, which lay far beneath the surface. The character of the western frontiersman is often a singular accumulation of such strata, the training and beliefs of his earliest days overlain by successions of unrelated and violent experiences, like geological deposits. Underneath the exterior crust of the most hardened and ruffianly nature often remains, its forms not yet quite fossilized, a realm full of the devout customs, doctrines, religious influences which the boy knew and the man remembers. By sudden upheaval, in some great catastrophe or struggle in his mature life, these all come again into the light. Assembled catechism definitions, which he learned in his childhood and has not thought of since, ring in his ears, and he is thrown into all manner of confusions and inconsistencies of feeling and speech by this clashing of the old and the new man within him. It was much in this way that Aunt Ree's words smote upon young Merrill. He was not many years removed from the sound of a preaching of the strictest New England Calvinism. The wild frontier life had drawn him in and under as in a whirlpool, but he was New Englander yet at heart. "That's so, Aunt Ree," he exclaimed. "That's so. I don't suppose a man that's committed murder'll ever have any peace in this world, nor in the next nother, without he repents. But you see, this hoss-stealing business is different. 'Tain't murder to kill a hoss-thief any way you can fix it. Everybody admits that. A feller that's caught hoss-stealing had ought to be shot, and he will be too, I tell you, in this country." A look of impatient despair spread over Aunt Ree's face. "I hain't no patience left with yer," she said, talking about stealing hosses as if hosses was more'n human beings. But lettin' that all go, this Injun, he was crazy. Yer all knowed it. That Farrar knowed it. Yer think if he'd been stealin' the hoss, he'd left his own hoss in the corral, same as yer might say leavin' his card to say 'twas he done it, and the hoss is tied in plain sight in front of his house for anybody ter see?" "Left his own hoss? So he did," retorted Merrill. "A poor, miserable, knock-kneed old pony that wa'n't worth $20, and Jim's hoss was worth $200, and cheap at that." "That ain't neither here nor there in what we are sayin'," persisted Aunt Ree. "I ain't a-speakin' on it as a swapper hosses. What I say is, he wa'n't tryin' to cover it up that he tuck the hoss. We are used ter hoss thieves in Tennessee, but I never heerd o' one yet that left his name for a reference behind him ter show which road he tuck, and fastened the stolen critter ter his front gate when he got hum. I allow me and you hadn't better say anything much more on the subject, for I allow we are bound to quarrel if we do." And nothing that Merrill said could draw another word out of Aunt Ree in regard to Alessandro's death. But there was another subject on which she was tireless, and her speech eloquent. It was the kindness and goodness of the Coahuilla people. The last vestige of her prejudice against Indians had melted and gone in the presence of their simple-hearted friendliness. "I'll never hear another word said agin 'em, never, ter my longest day," she said. "The way the poor things had just stripped theirselves to get things for Ramona beat all ever I see among white folks, and I've been round more'n most. And they weren't lookin' for no pay, nother, for they didn't know till Felipe and me come that she had any folks anywhere, and that had taken care on her till she died jest the same. The sick allers is took care of 'mong 'em, they said, 'slong as any of 'em has got a thing left. That's the way they air raised. I allow white folks might take a lesson on 'em in that, and in heaps of other things too. Oh, I'm done talkin' agin Injuns now, don't yer forget it. But I know for all that 'twon't make any difference. 'Pears like there couldn't nobody believe anything in this world without seein' it theirselves. I was that way too. I allow I hain't got no call ter talk, but I jest wish the hull world could see what I've seen, that's all." It was a sad day in the village when Ramona and her friends departed. Heartily as the kindly people rejoiced in her having found such a protector for herself and her child, and deeply as they felt Felipe and Aunt Ree's good-will and gratitude towards them, they were yet conscious of a loss, of a void. The gulf between them and the rest of the world seemed defined anew, their sense of isolation deepened, their hopeless poverty emphasized. Ramona, wife of Alessandro, had been as their sister, one of them. As such, she would have had share in all their life had to offer. But its utmost was nothing, was but hardship and deprivation, and she was being borne away from it like one rescued not so much from death as from a life worse than death. The tears streamed down Ramona's face as she bade them farewell. She embraced again and again the young mother who had for so many days suckled her child, even, it was said, depriving her own hardier babe that Ramona's should not suffer. "Sister, you have given me my child," she cried. "I can never thank you. I will pray for you all my life." She made no inquiries as to Felipe's plans. Unquestioningly, like a little child, she resigned herself into his hands. A power greater than hers was ordering her way. Felipe was its instrument. No other voice spoke to guide her. The same old simplicity of acceptance which had characterized her daily life in her girlhood, and kept her serene and sunny then, serene under trials, sunny in her routine of little duties, had kept her serene through all the afflictions, and calm, if not sunny, under all the burdens of her later life, and it did not desert her even now. Aunt Ri gazed at her with a sentiment as near to veneration as her dry, humorous, practical nature was capable of feeling. "I allow, I dunno but I should come ter believin' in saints too," she said, "if I was ter live 'longside her that gal. 'Pears like she was somethin' more'n human. 'T beats me plumb out, the way she takes her troubles. Thar's some would say she hadn't no feeling, but I allow she has more'n most folks. I can see 'tain't that. I allow I didn't never expect ter think so well of prayin' to pictures and strings or beads and sech. But if it's that keeps her up the way she's kept up, I allow there's more in it than it's had credit fur. I ain't gwine ter say any more agin it nor agin Injuns. 'Pears like I'm gettin' heaps er new idears inter my head these days. I'll turn Injun maybe afore I git through." The farewell to Aunt Ri was hardest of all. Ramona clung to her as to a mother. At times she felt that she would rather stay by her side than go home with Felipe. Then she reproached herself for the thought as for a treason and ingratitude. Felipe saw the feeling and did not wonder at it. "Dear girl," he thought, "it is the nearest she has ever come to knowing what a mother's love is like." And he lingered in San Bernardino week after week on the pretense that Ramona was not yet strong enough to bear the journey home, when in reality his sole motive for staying was his reluctance to deprive her of Aunt Ri's wholesome and cheering companionship. Aunt Ri was busily at work on a rag carpet for the Indian agent's wife. She had just begun it, had woven only a few inches on that dreadful morning when the news of Alessandra's death reached her. It was of her favorite pattern, the hit-or-miss pattern, as she called it. No set stripes or regular alternation of colors, but ball after ball of the indiscriminately mixed tints, woven back and forth on a warp of a single color. The constant variety in it, the unexpectedly harmonious blending of the colors, gave her delight, and afforded her a subject, too, of not unphilosophical reflection. "Wow," she said, "it's called the hit-or-miss pattern, but it's hit offer'n 'tis miss. There ain't any accountin' for the way the breadths'll come sometimes. 'Pears like 'twas kinder magic when they air sewed tergether. And I allow that's the way it's gwine ter be with heaps er things in this life. It's jest a kinder hit-or-miss pattern we air all on us livin' on. 'Tain't much use tryin' to reckon how it'll come out, but the breadths doos fits heaps better'n you'd think, come ter sew 'em. 'Tain't never no sich colors as you thought 'twas gwine ter be, but it's allers pooty, allers. Never see a hit-or-miss pattern in my life yet that wa'n't pooty. And there wa'n't never nobody fetched me rags and hed 'em all planned out in jest the way they wanted their warp, and jest how their stripes was ter come, and all, that they warn't orful disapp'inted when they come ter see it done. It don't never look's they thought 'twould, never. I larned that lesson airly, and I allers make 'em write out on a paper jest their width of every stripe, and each of their colors, so's they can see it's what they ordered, or else they'd allers say I hadn't wove it 's I was told ter. I got ketched that way onct. I allow anybody's a bawn fool gets ketched twice runnin' the same way. But for me, I'll take that hit-or-miss pattern every time, sir, straight along." When the carpet was done, Aunt Ri took the roll in her own independent arms and strode with it to the agent's house. She had been biding the time when she should have this excuse for going there. Her mind was burdened with questions she wished to ask, information she wished to give, and she chose an hour when she knew she would find the agent himself at home. "I allow you heerd why I was behind time with this yer carpet," she said. "I was up ter San Jacinto Mounting where that Injun was murdered. We brung his widder and their baby down with us, me and her brother. He's tuck her home ter his house ter live. He's real well off." Yes, the agent had heard this. He had wondered why the widow did not come to see him. He had expected to hear from her. "Well, I did hint to her that p'raps you could do something if she was to tell you all about it, but she allowed there wa'n't any use in talkin'. Their judge, he said her witnessin' wouldn't be worth nothin' to no jury, and that was what I was a-wantin' to ask you, if that was so." "Yes, that is what the lawyers here told me," said the agent. "I was going to have the man arrested, but they said it would be folly to bring the case to trial. The woman's testimony would not be believed." "You've got power to git a man punished for sellin' whiskey to Injuns, I notice," broke in Aunt Ri, "hain't yer? I see your man and the marshal here arrestin' 'em pooty lively last month. They said 'twas your doin'. You was a-gwine to prosecute every livin' son of hell, them was their words, that sold whiskey ter Injuns." "That's so," said the agent. "So I am. I am determined to break up this vile business of selling whiskey to Indians. It is no use trying to do anything for them while they are made drunk in this way. It's a sin and a shame." "That's so, I allow ter you," said Aunt Ri. "There ain't any gainsayin' that. But if you've got power to git a man put in jail for sellin' whiskey to an Injun, and hain't got power to git him punished if he goes and kills that Injun, seems to me there's something curious about that." "That is just the trouble in my position here, Aunt Ri," he said. "I have no real power over my Indians as I ought to have." "What makes you call 'em yer Injuns?" broke in Aunt Ri. The agent colored. Aunt Ri was a privileged character, but her logical method of questioning was inconvenient. "I only mean that they are under my charge," he said. "I don't mean that they belong to me in any way." "Well, I allow not," retorted Aunt Ri, "any more'n I do. They are airnin' their livin', sech as 'tis, if you can call it a livin'. I've been amongst 'em now, this hire last 2 weeks, and I allow I've hed my eyes open ter some things." "What's that doctor o' yourn, him that they call the agency doctor, what's he got ter do?" "To attend to the Indians of this agency when they are sick," replied the agent promptly. "Well, that's what I hearn. That's what you said afore. And that's why Alessandro, the Injun that was murdered, that's why he put his name down in yer books, though 'twa'n't agin him orful ter do it. He was high-spirited, and had allers took keer o' hisself, but he'd been druv outer first one place and then another, till he'd got clar down, and poor, and jest begged that doctor o' yourn to go to see his little gal, and the doctor wouldn't, and more'n that, he laughed at him for askin', and they set the little thing on the hoss to bring her here, and she died afore they come a mile with her. And 'twas that, on top o' all the rest, druv Alessandro crazy. He never had one o' them wandering spells till arter that. Now, I allow that wa'n't right in that doctor. I wouldn't hev no sech doctor as that around my agency if I was you. P'raps yer never heerd o' that. I told Ramona I didn't believe yer knowed it, or you'd have made him go." "No, Aunt Ri," said the agent, "I could not have done that. He is only required to doctor such Indians as come here." "I allow, then, there ain't any great use in having him at all," said Aunt Ri. "'Pears like there ain't more'n a harmful of Injuns round here. I expect he gets well paid." And she paused for an answer. None came. The agent did not feel himself obliged to reveal to Aunt Ri what salary the government paid the San Bernardino doctor for sending haphazard prescriptions to Indians he never saw. After a pause, Aunt Ri resumed. "If it ain't any offense to yer, I allow I'd like ter know jest what 'tis you air here to do for these Injuns. I've got my feelin's consid'able stirred up, bein' among 'em and knowin' this higher one that's been murdered. Have you got any power to give 'em anything, food or sech? They air powerful poor, most on 'em." "I have had a little fund for buying supplies for them in times of special suffering," replied the agent. "A very little. And the department has appropriated some money for wagons and plows. Not enough, however, to supply every village. You see, these Indians are in the main self-supporting." "That's just it," persisted Aunt Ri. "That's just what I been seein', and that's why I want so bad ter get at what 'tis the government means to have you do for 'em. I allow if you ain't ter feed 'em, and if you can't put folks inter jail for robbin' and cheatin' 'em, not ter say killin' 'em, if yer can't do anything more than keep 'em from gettin' whiskey, wal, I'm free ter say." Aunt Ri paused. She did not wish to seem to reflect on the agent's usefulness, and so concluded her sentence very differently from her first impulse. "I'm free ter say I shouldn't like ter stand in your shoes." "You may very well say that, Aunt Ri," laughed the agent, complacently. "It is the most troublesome agency in the whole list, and the least satisfactory." "Well, I allow it mought be the least satisfyin'," rejoined the indefatigable Aunt Ri, "but I don't know whar the trouble comes in, if so be there's no more can be done than you was a-tellin' me." And she looked honestly puzzled. "Look there, Aunt Ri," said he triumphantly, pointing to a pile of books and papers. "All those to be gone through with, and a report to be made out every month, and a voucher to be sent for every lead pencil I buy. I tell you I work harder than I ever did in my life before, and for less pay." "I allow you've had easy times afore then," retorted Aunt Ri, good-naturedly satirical, "if you air plumb tired doin' that." And she took her leave, not a whit clearer in her mind as to the real nature and function of the Indian Agency than she was in the beginning. End of chapter 26, Part 1.